Sometimes there's just real feasibility problems in running trials in certain ways and certain conditions in the real world. When products are in the real world, it actually gets more difficult. So I think this administration seems to be posturing that they might be open to the best way to collect information that might best enable continued learnings about products once they're on the market.
Hello, welcome to this episode of FDA Watch. I'm Wayne Pines, your host, and thanks for joining today. As you all know, we're the leading independent, nonpartisan forum dedicated to discussing the latest developments and trends and issues surrounding FDA. I just want to start out by reminding you, if you have not subscribed to the podcast, shame on you. You can do so today. Go to fdawatch.net. You'll receive an email whenever a new episode appears. You'll get access to our headlines and resource links. It's free. Go to fdawatch.net. You go to the bottom of that page. You'll see you put in your email address and say submit, and you will receive information and be notified whenever we have a new episode. Today we're going to be focusing on pharma. We have two great guests to guide us through. You'll meet them in just a minute. Let me first get to some headlines. I want to start out by noting that Peter Marks, with whom both of our guests today and I worked at FDA, he was, of course, the former director of CBER, has announced that he is joining Eli Lilly. Peter left FDA as CBER director in March. He's the second former FDA official to join Lilly. Lilly also hired Rachel Anatole, who was former deputy office director for the Office of Therapeutics at CBER. I've been concerned about some of the criticism we hear about this revolving door. Everybody knows that Peter is a person of the highest integrity, but beyond that, the revolving door myth where people at FDA who leave are criticized for doing what they know how to do, and that is engage in scientific discovery and regulation. So I want to just address that, and Carter and Elizabeth, our two guests today, may also want to address it because we all know Peter very, very well. I want to move on to headlines from the device desk. The FDA is seeking public input on how best to measure and evaluate AI-enabled medical devices once they're in real-world use. The agency is especially focused on how performance may drift over time. FDA is asking for detailed feedback. You can provide comments by December 1st. I'll give you the docket number quickly. It's FDA 2025 N4203. N4203 if you want to comment on that commentary by FDA. The food area, according to an article in Food Safety News, FDA continues to investigate a listeria outbreak linked to grocers across the U.S., as well as a salmonella outbreak. We continue to see headlines about listeria and salmonella outbreaks. Since the first listeria outbreak, which was reported on April 9th, a total of 20 people from 15 states have been infected with the outbreak strain. As of September 25th, 19 patients were hospitalized, 5 died. All of these cases have been linked to pre-cooked pasta. This is something that we'll continue to follow on our podcast and see whether they can come to the bottom, understanding what's going on there. And then finally, from the cosmetics desk, a Los Angeles jury awarded $966 million to the family of a California woman who died in 2021, finding that the company's talc-based baby powder contributed to her fatal mesothelioma. The company will appeal. There's a lot of litigation involved with talc. As we all recall, earlier this year, the company tried and failed to settle the claims, and the company maintains confidence in the safety record. FDA, of course, has been keeping an eye on talc-containing products. Earlier this year, Commissioner McCarry convened a group to discuss it, and I think that we're going to probably be seeing more about talc. So let's move on, meet our guests for today. First up is Cartier Esham. Cartier is CEO of Esham Strategies. More importantly to me, she's executive director of the Alliance for a Stronger FDA. I'm one of the founders of the Alliance, and I'm on the executive committee. Carter's done a sensational job. This is the most difficult year from a budgetary standpoint that FDA has faced, and the Alliance is very much an advocate for assuring that FDA has adequate funding, and this is especially a difficult time. Before founding Esham Strategies, Carter was the Chief Scientific Officer and Executive Vice President of Bio. So welcome to FDA Watch, Carter.
So glad to be here, Wayne. Thanks for having me.
Also joining us today is Elizabeth Jungman. Elizabeth, a partner in Hogan Lovells. She's part of the firm's Pharmaceuticals and Biotechnology practice. Before joining Hogan, she served in a number of senior roles at FDA, Capitol Hill, and the nonprofit center at FDA. Elizabeth was chief of staff to the agency. In that capacity, the chief of staff, just so people know, oversees the day-to-day management of the agency, provides strategic counsel as well as management. Prior to that, Elizabeth led policy for the Center for Drugs. So welcome to our podcast today, Elizabeth. Look forward to hearing from you as well.
It's a real treat to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So I want to start out with a question to both. Let me start with Carter. FDA has said, and we're going to focus on pharma today. FDA has said that it's maintaining its drug review process, even with the reduction in employees that have occurred in CDER and CBER. I just want to ask a general question as to your view as to how the agency is doing in terms of drug and biologics approvals, and what do you see going on in those two centers?
Sure, thanks, Wayne. And I'll just note, though, at the top of this, everything is still pretty anecdotal at this point. And I think people, I sort of caution people about over projecting any one particular stat and making big statements about it. I've certainly seen headlines, for example, about lower numbers of approvals for this year compared to the last couple of years. But we all know, anybody's been watching that for a long time, those can vary and go up and down for a whole variety of reasons. That being said, I think that I'm aware that some of the trade organizations are working with their members to collect information to make sure that everybody's monitoring and staying on top of the situation, to ensure that the workloads are being managed and everything's going in a timely manner. PDUFA dates continue to be met in a productive manner. Again, thus far, I'm not really hearing anything overly negative at this point, and I think we are still waiting to see how some of these centralized processes are going to create efficiencies at the agency. So again, some of this is still evolving very much, and I think we just need to be diligent to make sure that we are being productive partners with the FDA to alert them if we start to see things, if there start to be any sort of early signs that perhaps more resources are needed just to keep up with the sheer workload that the FDA has to manage. But I think those efforts are ongoing.
Elizabeth, let me ask you for your overview comments, same subject.
Sure. Well, I think just kind of taking a step back, it's important to recognize that while there's been a lot of attention on the rifts that happened in April, there were a number of programs that happened before that encouraged government employees to leave and certainly affected FDA. This was things like the effort to push out the probationary employees. There was a deferred resignation program that paid people until the end of September to go ahead and leave. There was a voluntary incentive payment program where you got a $25,000 check if you agreed to leave the agency. Very importantly, there was a program that allowed folks who had achieved their years of service to get federal retirement benefits, but who had not yet reached retirement age to leave the agency. And the reason I mention all of these in the context of this question is that this wasn't a situation where there were targeted, where specific divisions or functions were targeted. There was really a effect across the agency where you're going to find pockets of the agency that were really significantly affected and pockets of the agency that really look a lot like they did before. And you're certainly seeing that, I think, in the review divisions. So the review divisions were not specifically targeted in the RIFs, but they were affected, sometimes quite significantly, in these other efforts to pare down the size of the government. So according to some ProPublica data, CBER lost about 26% of its workforce, CDER lost about 20% of its workforce. And that's really not just in those kind of administrative and policy functions. And so what you're going to see is some divisions that look very similar to the way they might have looked a year ago, some divisions that have been really devastated by what happened. Kind of across the board, you're seeing leadership and folks who have been in the agency for a long time. Many of those people have left. And so those are the kind of folks who might have had the experience to be involved in tough decisions and decisions where there's not really precedent, that kind of thing. And so I do think you're going to see not a uniform effect on product approval, but places where certain areas are more hard hit than others.
Carter, I want to come back to one of the comments you make, and that is a lot, and I think you both agree, a lot is anecdotal. We don't have a lot of numbers, but I do want to ask you one pointed question, and that is there have been a number of recent news stories about politics. I'll put that in parentheses, politics influencing some of the drug and biologics reviews. What are you hearing about that generally? And I want both of you to comment, obviously, on, the concern that at least I have, and I'm sure that you do as well, about politics influencing any of these product approvals.
Well, I think it's important to note that it is vitally important that the FDA maintains its scientific credibility and leads by science and evidence. I mean, that's what it's charged to do, is to evaluate evidence, make determinations of safety and efficacy based on the best science. So that is what needs to drive decisions to maintain its, not just its function, but its leadership position. It is known to be, we always call it the gold standard. And I know there's publications on the importance of maintaining that gold standard. So that, to me, means leading by science, leading by the best science, leading, by the strongest evidence. So I'll just say that. I think in terms of, what you may be alluding to, and again, I think we're still a bit in an anecdotal stage, but there is obviously a very tight relationship between HHS and FDA, perhaps closer than we've seen in recent past. And so I think we're still determining how those decisions are being made, when they're being made, why they're being made, how, what is the process by which those things are happening. I think we're still kind of learning, how, if something in the administration at HHS, for example, they want to weigh in on something happening at the FDA, when and how is that going to happen? How does the commissioner react to that? What's the interaction with the center directors and the review teams? I think that's all going to be, I hope that becomes part of the radical transparency that the commissioner talks about a lot, is to really understand when and why those situations may occur. And I think that would help people understand how science is leading these decisions. And that's going to be very important to continue to communicate.
Elizabeth?
Well, certainly I couldn't agree more that the decisions have to remain science-led, or the agency loses its credibility, both with the public and around the world. I do think we have seen this administration more willing to engage in product-specific decisions and conversations than has been typical in the past. That has often not been in the favor of industry. And so it's been interesting to me that certainly some of the chatter from industry has indicated that folks think that, the political leadership of the agency is going to intervene on their behalf in product-specific decisions. And so we are certainly continuing to counsel clients that, it's really business as usual in the way people, should be interacting with the agency. That you really are going to have to work issues out with the division, just like you always have. And so this thought that seems to be out there that when you get stuck with the division, you can kind of very quickly escalate up to the political leadership. Certainly, I think there are reasons to consider escalation maybe a little differently than we would have 6 months ago. But the basics of dealing with the agency are really the same. These are still scientific decisions that are driven by, the division level staff at the agency, and that's really the place to focus attention.
Right. Appreciate that. Elizabeth, I want to shift gears a little bit. As you know, there's been an effort starting at the White House to bring pharmaceutical manufacturing, I'm going to say, back to the U.S., or to increase the strength in the domestic pharmaceutical supply chain. Again, I'm going to ask a very general question. We've seen a number of companies that have already committed to building manufacturing facilities in the U.S. How do you see that affecting, what's going on at FDA, and how the FDA is going to be managing that as we move forward?
Well, I think there are a lot of factors that influence the decision by a sponsor where to locate their manufacturing facilities. And while I think folks are trying to be responsive, it remains to be seen the degree to which this kind of America First agenda really will drive those business decisions. I certainly think that, kind of depending on how the tariff process plays out, there may be more pressure for folks to really think about onshoring. There are a couple of ways that FDA has tried to incentivize that. One is that it is an eligibility criteria. So domestic manufacturing is an eligibility criteria for the Commissioner's National Priority Review Voucher Program. It doesn't really roll off the tongue, but this is a program that is essentially committing to extremely fast review times, 1 to 2 month review times for the very limited number of products that are awarded these national priority vouchers. There's a few ways you can become eligible for that program, and one of them is willingness to onshore. So that's one way FDA is trying to kind of support this America First movement. The other one is that the agency has launched this PreCheck initiative that really is designed to better provide customer service to companies that are looking to locate facilities to the U.S. So this is kind of early interaction with the agency, where the agency will give you feedback much earlier in the process, so that you can have more confidence that if you do relocate and you've got a domestic facility being built, that will ultimately pass inspection and be kind of ready to roll. And so there are a few ways that the agency has really tried to kind of lean into this America First initiative, but I really do think it remains to be seen. And it will be heavily influenced by the tariff conversation. It remains to be seen.
I want to ask the caller the same question, but I want to follow up with you, Elizabeth. As chief of staff, you were responsible for the day-to-day management of the agency. How would something like this be implemented, where the PreCheck program, the voucher program? How would that actually be implemented within the agency?
Well, I think differently for each of those programs. So the voucher program, I think we saw during COVID that when the agency commits its resources to doing extraordinarily fast reviews of products, that it can get that done. And so what happened in the COVID era was that, all resources were really focused on products that met that public health need. And when we got it done fast, that obviously can't happen for every product every day at all times, right? Because that was really a matter of prioritizing, marshaling resources behind a particular product. But I don't think there's any reason that the agency can't do it again for another handful of products. So for the voucher program, the agency has said they're going to be issuing 5 vouchers this year. So it is a small number of products. It is my understanding the agency has been in contact with the divisions and has been seeking their feedback about what actually could be ready in that kind of a time frame. And so these may not all be just kind of shot in the dark. Politicals from on high are decreeing that something has to be reviewed in a month or two without the division leadership really having confirmed that that's possible. So that strikes me as doable. If it became, now every product review is going to need to happen in a month or two, that's not sustainable with current resources. But, differently resourced or kind of making different use of tools like AI over over the long haul, you could certainly imagine seeing review times coming down in a broader way. The PreCheck initiative is really a matter of agency resources again. And so I think this is going to kind of get us into the conversation we'll have later about the budget and resources. But, with enough resources devoted to anything, you can make a difference. And so to the extent that the agency is willing to commit resources to going and having those kind of early stage conversations with companies, there's no reason that they can't do that. It's going to pull from other priorities, particularly in a more austere environment. And so we'll have to see what ultimately the trade-offs end up being.
Right. Carter, you dealt with manufacturing, when you were at Bio, and of course you're doing the same as part of the alliance. Just your, I'm going to make the question very general, just your impression as to what's going on at the agency, just to build on what Elizabeth has just said.
Well, it's hard to build on that. That was such a great answer, Elizabeth. But, I would say that I'd sort of couch it in, I think that those two programs highlight that the agency is doing what it can, under its purview and jurisdiction to be helpful. But I feel very confident saying, it's going to take more to have continued sustainable growth in the manufacturing sector here in the United States. And I think it will be also important as these conversations continue to evolve to begin to think strategically and maybe not lump manufacturing as an all one thing, really maybe try to distinguish what the opportunities are for finished fills, the opportunities are to build capacity on demand and versus, API production, for example, because I think that the incentives that are needed to really drive sustainable growth in those two areas are slightly different. So, and it will take more than the FDA. That's going to take tax incentives, work with permitting, all kinds of other types of policies, and frankly, perhaps some premium ability to be for product incentives that are made in part or in whole in the United States are going to have to be part of those discussions for continued sustainable growth, I think.
Right. I want to shift gears for a second before we take our break and talk about confirmatory evidence and accelerated approvals. We just did a podcast on orphan drugs and rare diseases, and confirmatory evidence and accelerated approval are especially important in that area. And we see a lot of evolution taking place. Elizabeth, I want to start out with you. Again, an overview question. Can the FDA's evolving stance on confirmatory evidence and accelerated approval reshape how companies approach their clinical trial designs or risk disclosures? How do you see that applying as a practical matter?
I think it will have to, the companies will have to evolve the way they're thinking about clinical trial design to stay in line with FDA's evolving stance on this issue. As most folks listening to this podcast will probably know, accelerated approval is the idea is that you're getting approval based on substantial evidence of effectiveness on an endpoint that is substantially likely to produce a clinical benefit. But then you've got to go back and confirm that clinical benefit is actually achieved in a post-market setting. And so there's some legislation in 2023 that gave FDA new authority both to require that these trials be underway at the time that the agency is granting accelerated approval, and to make to more quickly remove products from the market if those obligations aren't met. And so, we've seen this evolving over the last couple 3 years. You've always needed to have confirmatory evidence, but it used to be not that uncommon for companies to not get those confirmatory trials done, or to not get them done on the timeline that the agency had been anticipating. Now the agency is largely, in most spaces, going to be looking to see that you're already enrolling that trial, or that the trial is well underway by the time they grant the accelerated approval. There's also kind of new guidance from the agency about wanting more detail about what the study's going to look like. They're going to want specific milestones. They're going to want enrollment targets. They really want to kind of understand how you're going to go about confirming the clinical benefit there. And of course, there are the new procedures for expedited withdrawal of approval if those confirmatory studies fail to verify the clinical benefit. And so I do think that the rare disease space is a little bit of an exception to the rule. I think that's a place where we're probably going to see FDA offer some flexibility on those clinical trial, the confirmatory trial requirements. But in general, I think if sponsors are considering the accelerated approval pathway, they need to be more sure than ever that they can get those confirmatory trials done.
Right, right, and we've seen that, and we've seen, as you said, that movement started even before the current administration. Carter, let me ask you the same question about confirmatory evidence and accelerated approvals. Especially in the biologics area, that you come out of bio and you've got your perspective based on your experience there.
I'll say a high level comment first, and I think it's in everybody's best interest to ensure that the accelerated approval pathway is able to continue and successfully, and however that is defined today. We have seen that pathway be used to really advance science and make treatments available much sooner than they would have been without that pathway. It also leads to just moving science along faster that goes beyond that initial indication. It impacts, knowledge and mechanisms of action writ large that can really benefit multiple therapies across multiple diseases. So as Elizabeth said, I think it's in everybody's best interest that the FDA does appropriately use its authority to make determinations if the benefit is determined not to have been met. That they do what they need to do to address that issue with that product. Again, it's almost a reputational thing. You actually want that to be part of the system and people to have confidence that that is part of the system moving forward. Without it, I think we continue to. So as Elizabeth said, taking those commitments very seriously, being very engaged with the FDA. If you're running into problems, don't wait for them to come to you. Go to them. Try to address it as quickly as possible. And if things have to be shifted for whatever operational feasibility issues you may be running into, again, I would say proactively engage with the agency. Make sure those communications are open and ongoing is going to be really important moving forward. And the reason I say all of this is because the more that there is less confidence in this pathway, it's not only going to affect things at the FDA, it empowers people to think that some of these products should be covered, which would be really problematic and I think a great detriment to many patients who do benefit from these innovative medicines.
Yeah, I see the current administration, I think, is very committed to the concept of bringing drugs to market more quickly and accelerated approval and the use of confirmatory evidence, including real world evidence. Is that, you agree with that, Carter?
I certainly see a lot of embracing from this commissioner and this administration to advance technologies, generally speaking. And I think there's great appreciation for how modern approaches to evidence generation and evidence analysis can be utilized to create efficiencies as well as to broaden understanding. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to, there was already a lot of progress that sort of leapfrogged, during the pandemic years about how to use technology, how to collect data. So the good news is there was some forward movement, and I think it's very positive to see these concepts being embraced by regulators in a way that I think everybody sees the potential. So I think that's actually a really positive thing happening, and I think room for a lot of improvement. Exactly how that all ties into specifically how they're viewing that with accelerated approval. Again, I think those are opportunities for conversations about maybe more efficient ways to collect that data. As Elizabeth and I both, I think, alluded to, and Elizabeth, you can correct me if I'm wrong, sometimes there's just real feasibility problems in running trials in certain ways and certain conditions in the real world. When products are in the real world, it actually gets more difficult. I think this administration seems to be posturing that they might be open to the best way to collect information that might best enable continued learnings about products once they're on the market. But I'll go back. I'd like to throw back to Elizabeth to make sure she can correct anything I said.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I do think we're I think, veering a little bit from the accelerated approval topic here a little bit, but I do think part of what you were alluding to, if I understood you correctly, was this new interest in and it's not an entirely new interest for sure, but certainly a new emphasis on how the agency thinks about the data that it has at its possession, how it can kind of mine that data, how it can use AI to really accelerate approval decisions. That to me is an exciting area. It's not there yet. It's not something where the agency is, for the most part, being able to use those tools in review decisions and really kind of making a meaningful difference. But it's something that the agency's got to wrap its head around. And I'm delighted by the prospect that this may not be a situation where the entire world sort of moves forward technologically, and the agency is lagging behind as has happened in some areas in the past. And not because folks internally didn't understand the importance, but because the agency has historically not been resourced in a way to allow it to really get its data systems in order. And so, both from how we kind of think about ensuring that sponsors are meeting these post-market obligations, but I think more broadly, this emphasis on how we can use technology to make reviews more efficient is a positive thing.
Yeah. On that note, we're going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And we're back. We're chatting with Cartier Esham and Elizabeth Jungman about FDA and issues specific to pharma. But I want to ask Cartier to start out with a broad question, the subject that she deals with every day of her working life. Now, let me preface it by introducing what she's doing in terms of the Alliance, because as you may know, I was one of the founders of the Alliance, served as president for many years. Cartier took it over this year as executive director. She previously served on the board, and as I mentioned in introducing her, she's done a terrific job with a very, very challenging situation. So I want to ask Cartier for we have relatively limited time here. You could go on for the rest of the day in talking about the budget. This is something that better than just about anybody, but just an overview of what you anticipate for FDA's budget, not just in the drug and biologics area, but also in the devices area and the food area and the cosmetics area. And then I'm going to ask Elizabeth to comment on that and how the budget situation affects companies and what they can do in terms of helping advance an adequate FDA budget. So Cartier, let me turn to you first.
Sure, and thank you for that. And I will do a 30-second shameless plug. But being the executive director of the Alliance has been a highlight of my career. It's my honor to serve that organization because it does do two very important things. One is it does unite the entire community of people interested in ensuring that the FDA is able to carry out its mission in the most effective way possible through ensuring that they have proper funding via the appropriations process. But the other thing it does is really focus on continued education of members of Congress and their staff about why the FDA matters, how it impacts businesses in their hometowns, how it affects patients in their communities and families in their communities. And that's really an ongoing effort that should never be underestimated. So just to say that up front, and everybody should join.
Right. And before I let you go, in our mutual interest, give us the website that people can log into.
If you just type in Alliance for a Stronger FDA, it'll lead you right there. Also on LinkedIn, we have a LinkedIn page, so pretty easy to find us. So about the budget, if we go back to the beginning of the year. I think people were anxiously awaiting what the president's budget was going to be. We were certainly hearing a lot about how there was a desire to find savings through reductions in workforce and through the budget and appropriations processes. And frankly, the FDA fared pretty well. I mean, compared to many others where we're hearing 40 and 20% cuts, the proposal for the FDA was around a 4% cut. That did pass the House fairly quickly. That followed the president's budget almost exactly. The Senate actually provided some levels of fundings over the president's budget. So the FDA in the appropriations conversations to date have actually fared pretty well. And we hope to ensure that that continues. And what we really focused on with the alliance was to make sure, given that backdrop, we wanted just to make sure that there's the ability of Congress and FDA to engage in conversations over time to, again, make sure that they have the resources that they need. And if there's any situation where they need to increase their resources, if they're able to do that in a timely manner. So the workforce aside, the funding seems to be in pretty, comparatively in pretty good shape. Um, the interesting thing that's happening right now, that's beginning to happen, I think there's going to be some delays due to a shutdown, but imminently we're expecting the user fee agreements across the agency to begin to take place. Now, one interesting, and for those that don't know, basically user fees across the board make up almost half of the FDA's total budget. So about half comes from taxpayer appropriated dollars, and about half comes through a variety of user fee programs. One of the largest of which is, of course, the prescription drug user fee agreement. So those are getting ready to start. We'll start to see how this administration and this FDA approach those user fees. I think it will be of particular interest to follow how some of the funding that's historically been used to fund IT efforts that may look different this time, because again, they're centralizing some of those systems. So we'll start to see how they're going to approach that from a funding situation. So that's just something we're going to have to watch out for to see if some of that moves into out of user fees, maybe into budget authority, or how that's just going to be managed. Because I think we all agree, we just talked about data. We want to make sure that the FDA is able to continue to modernize, keep pace with IT, data analytics, the ability to keep up with AI, digital tools, medtech, all of it. So basically, our understanding is that among all of the appropriations bill, I think we're among the least controversial. The FDA bill is among the least controversial, and if appropriations bills move once they return to later this year, I expect to see that to be one of the first out of the chute. So we'll see. That's putting on a bit of a crystal ball, but that is expectations as they stand at the time of this podcast. Wayne.
Okay. Elizabeth, let me shift to you and ask you how does the FDA budget situation really affect companies, and what do they need to do to support an adequate funding for the FDA? It's very important for the industry to have adequate funding because all the products go through the agency. So, how do you view that? How should companies react?
Well, for years, industry has been pushing FDA to staff up to support efficient reviews and also to ensure that the agency has modern expertise. That you've got folks who understand, new types of products, new types of statistical methods, new technologies like AI. So there's been a lot of pressure from the industry for the agency to really make sure it's got adequate staff to support efficient review programs. And as we discussed earlier in this podcast, that while improvements in IT systems and the use of AI are encouraging and potentially promising for the long term, but they're nowhere in the position at this point of being able to replace the role of FDA reviewers and FDA staff. And so to get to the efficient reviews that are important to industry, FDA is going to have to fund staff. They're going to have to fund those IT priorities. And so I don't think anyone thinks that, shifting to, I shouldn't speak for everyone in the world, but I think it's not the commonly held view that a bigger shift to user fees is the answer to that issue. And so, support for continued funding for the agency is going to be really important to make sure that these kind of all of the rhetoric about quick approval times and faster reviews can actually become a reality.
I want to ask you, Elizabeth, one final question. It has to do with AI. In every one of our podcasts, we have to deal with AI because obviously that's the future. It's unrelated to what any political issues. AI is going to be a major factor for all of us moving forward. How do you see the ramped up use of AI at FDA affecting the agency, and how is it affecting your clients?
I think right now, the ways that the agency is using AI are kind of the ways that probably most of us are using AI at work. So I think you could anticipate things like if you're submitting a meeting package to the agency, you may well have members of the review team who are, uploading that meeting package and querying the meeting package rather than necessarily reading it from front to back like they might once have, those types of things. My understanding is that the sort of promise of the systems that are really intended to accelerate review haven't really come through yet. There's hallucination issues. There's some problems with the way that's working, but it is getting agency staff sort of used to using AI and kind of grappling with those concepts. And I think there's very specific areas where there are agency priorities that are really well suited to AI. So things like there's just been this big push on DTC advertising over the past several weeks, and it's a place where the agency has said one of the things they want to focus on is DTC advertising that's happening in the social media or digital space. So influencers, but also things like dark ads, places where ads are maybe targeted to specific users rather than being something that can easily be found on a website. And so you can imagine, using AI to sort of get into some of those spaces that might otherwise be harder for the agency to monitor, to flag by the products for agency review. So I think there's specific areas where it could be really useful. And I think there's, generally seems to be a commitment to figuring out how to use it more broadly.
Right. And we're going to address the crackdown on advertising in a future episode of the podcast. I want to turn briefly to our resource link segment where we provide some valuable links that our listeners might want to check out. In order to check them out, you go to our website. I'm going to repeat our website several times, fdawatch.net. There's no need to write anything down. If you're interested in any of the resources we identify, go to fdawatch.net and the information will be there. Number one, on the pharma side, FDA launched a new pilot program to fast track the review of generic drug applications, ANDAs, for products tested and manufactured within the U.S. We talked about that briefly earlier. The idea is to reward companies that use U.S. bioequivalence testing and source APIs domestically by giving them priority reviews. We encourage listeners to learn more about our resource link in this area. Very, very important. It deals not only with generic drugs, but also with preference, I'm going to say, for drugs that are manufactured and tested domestically. On the medical device side, the Medical Device Network released a new episode of its podcast, Global Data Healthcare, which discusses how FDA's decision to kill its own final rule on LDTs has affected the process. The episodes deal with the legal, regulatory, and industry fallout from the pullback. Gets a little bit deep into the weeds, but in a good way. So check it out. Again, you can access that podcast by going to fdawatch.net. In the food area, former FDA Deputy Commissioner Frank Yanis, who's been a guest on our podcast earlier, and author Jack Payne will offer their insights on October 30th. It's just coming up. It's a webinar hosted by the Food Industry Executive. They will be discussing the industry's evolution from handwritten records to digital first expectations and explore how culture and technology must align to drive compliance. Again, you can get a link to that registration page, fdawatch.net. Cosmetics Desk, FDA recently launched a dashboard for cosmetic products, which records adverse events. This provides real-time access. This is a very important development. Real-time access to adverse event reports tied to cosmetics and personal care products. It's dedicated exclusively to reports of cosmetic product adverse events and includes serious adverse events submitted by responsible people for cosmetics under requirements by MOCRA, the new cosmetics law. Again, our link takes you right to the dashboard. So FDAWatch.net. If you haven't subscribed yet to our podcast, go there. If you want to access any of these links, go there. On that note, we're going to conclude. I want to thank Carter and Elizabeth for being such great guests. We covered a lot of material. We could have extended this and doubled or tripled the time. I also want to thank our podcast creator and executive producer, Michael Levin Epstein, our assistant producer, Sam Hoffmeister. I want to remind you that you can always contact us, not only by accessing FDAWatch.net, but at info@FDAWatch.net. And again, you can subscribe. Finally, we'd appreciate it. Give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. It really does make a difference. And remember to follow us, again, FDAWatch.net. And as we say at the end of every episode of FDA Watch, if you really want to watch what FDA is doing, listen to FDA Watch.